Good afternoon and welcome to today's Oregon Employment Department Media Availability. We're going to give everybody a couple more minutes before we get started. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. I am Rebecca Gibson King. I'm the OED Communications Director. And today we're going to do things a little bit differently as we don't have any prepared remarks. Instead, we're going to go directly to the Q&A portion of the call. Available for questions today are State Employment Economist Gail Krumenauer, Paid Leave Oregon Director Karen Madden-Hummelbaugh, and Unemployment Insurance Director Lindsi Leady. Unfortunately, our OED Director David Gerstenfeld is not available today. Couple of quick notes. This call is being recorded and we will post the recording online and send out the link after the briefing. If you have any technical difficulties or are otherwise unable to get your question answered today, please always feel free to email us at communications@employ.oregon.gov and we will be happy to assist you. If you're joining us by phone, please make sure to hit *6 to unmute yourself when we call on you. And as a courtesy, please limit yourself to one question and one follow-up question. If you don't get your question answered today, we're always happy to help. And I am now going to open it up to the first, we'll be calling on you as the first people to raise your hands. And let's see who has raised their hand first. I see Christina Giarnelli with K2. Go ahead, Christina.
Yeah, thanks so much for taking questions. More than a question, I'm hoping that go over a little bit some of the findings in the report that you just released on federal jobs in Oregon and some of the impacts as well as regionality that went over in terms of what we could see with some of these latest layoffs in February and into March.
I think she's talking about the report that you put out yesterday, Gail.
Yes.
Yes. Would you just like some general highlights, or is there anything specific you'd like me to touch on?
Yeah, the highlights, I think my focus and what I was seeing is that the impacts could likely be felt more in rural Oregon than in the metro areas, just based on where some of the largest portions of the job shares are, as well as impacts to revenue in those areas. So if you could talk a little bit about that.
Great, thank you for the question. Oregon had an average of about 29,600 federal government jobs on payrolls in Oregon. That's an average for the first 9 months of 2024. That accounted for about 1.5% of all jobs in Oregon, which is a slightly smaller share than we see for the US. That's closer to 2% of all US employment is federal government jobs. And so in terms of how those jobs are distributed, it's a little bit differently across Oregon. As I mentioned, the total federal government workforce that's on payrolls, on federal government payrolls, is about 1.5% of total employment statewide. It does tend to be a higher share in many of Oregon's rural counties. For example, in Sherman County, federal government employment made up about 14% of the total. And actually for the top 10 counties by federal government share of total employment, the top 10 counties are all rural.
Do you know what some of those agencies are in the rural areas, and could you list some of those? Because I know that, for example, U.S. Postal Service is one of the largest statewide, and that's excluded so far from the layoffs. But some of the other larger ones may not be, like VA and stuff like that.
So I don't have with me the breakout of agency employment by county right now. What I can tell you is that you're correct. The U.S. Postal Service is the largest federal government employer in Oregon. And looking just statewide, we take a look because there's some big seasonality in different agencies during different times of the year, like thinking, Forest Service, for example, in the summertime. So what we do is, to account for that, we take a look at about the same time last year. And in the first quarter of 2024, Oregon had about 28,600 jobs on federal government payrolls. The largest federal government employer in Oregon was the U.S. Postal Service, 7,000 jobs, followed by the Department of Veterans Affairs with 6,400 jobs. And more than 4,500 of those VA jobs were at hospitals and medical centers that were serving veterans. So if we think about where those centers are located, those are the geographical areas that are most likely to be affected by those. The medical centers, think of in Portland and other places. The U.S. Department of Agriculture employed nearly 4,000, which included almost 3,400 workers at U.S. Forest Service jobs. Again, that was in the first quarter of 2024. And so we do see that there does tend to be, a distribution with a higher share of those workers, a higher share of federal government employment making up the total in rural areas. If there are any particular counties that you wanted to know about in general, we could talk about what their totals are, what share that is of their total employment, but I don't have the federal government specific breakouts for every single county on hand.
If there are any of the counties that you mentioned that are more impacted in the report that you could send numbers for at some point today, that would be helpful to have. The other question I have is the numbers that you have for those federal employment. It's not congruent with the OPM, the Federal Personnel Management data that's put out for federal employees in Oregon. If you narrow it down by location, I just wonder why that's not the same.
As I'm talking about, the numbers that we have that we're able to report are the federal government jobs that are on federal government agency payrolls. There are, likely to be some contract workers and 1099, some people who are doing other types of work. There's also some military personnel that are not on the covered employment data that we have. So there could be some differences based on those kind of distinctions.
But to be specific, OPM's lower, quite a bit lower than your numbers. So they're estimating it somewhere around 19,000. 19,000.
That's very interesting. We can take a look at them along with the information that you were hoping to get for more detailed agency information by county. We can take a look at both of those things together. If you would like to share the report that you have with me, I can see if there's any way that we could possibly take a look at what they have underlying that. What we have again is jobs that are at federal government agencies that are on their payrolls.
I would love to keep going, but I don't want to jump in over
Yeah,
other.
I was gonna
I'm
say,
sorry, I don't have the
raised.
resource that you're referencing on hand, so I'm sorry, I can't pick through it line by line.
No, that's fine. I have other questions too, but I'll wait and make sure other people have turns.
Okay. Great, thank you. Brad Ford with KEX, please go ahead.
Two-part question. Number one, is the investigation into whether a worker gets unemployment benefits different when it's the federal government being investigated as the employer instead of a private employer?
I'll take that one. No. So when we look at job separations, what we do like a full investigation. We look at what happened on the day of the separation to cause the final incident. We look at that the same across sectors. So there's not a different rubric for federal employers. So we, take statements, we get information. And so like, we've gotten some questions about well, what about just cause? And so, but we look at what happened and then make the eligibility determination based on the facts in the case by case basis.
All right, so part two kind of relates to that. If their letter from the government says that they were fired for cause, does that exclude them from benefits? And if not, why might that be the case?
And so again, we don't look at, just like with any employer, if they were saying something, I fired this person for cause, we would look at what does that mean? So what happened to lead up to the firing? What happened on that last day that, they terminated the employee? And we talk to the claimant to get information about their side, and then we talk to the employer, and then we look at that based on the Oregon laws and rules to see if they actually have eligibility or if they don't. And so just having it something that says this was just cause, again, we would say that is interesting, but we would still go through the full investigation to figure out what happened and if they have eligibility.
All right, one more quick follow-up then.
Sure.
When it is the federal government, do you contact somebody locally to do that investigation? Do you have to go through DC in order to do that investigation? How does that work?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So we would, ideally we would talk to the person that did the the termination. So usually we talk to, HR shops, sometimes direct supervisors. Sometimes they contract that out. They have a payroll company or something like that for different employers. So for, the federal agency, we would follow the same processes that we normally do. So we'd have contact information, but we don't have to contact like the head of the agency in DC or something like that. So we would just follow our normal processes and get the information and then make an eligibility determination.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, I don't see any other people with their hands raised. So Christina, I'll give you, oh, Tom, did you have a question? Okay, I'm gonna give Tom a chance to ask a question. Go ahead, Tom. Or sorry, Tim.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, Tim Gordon with KGW. Sorry, a little different Zoom setup here for me, so I'm figuring it out. Forgive me, but so my question is, are you seeing any evidence about the layoffs, the federal layoffs yet? And if so, can you quantify it and discuss it? So it's kind of a general question about whether if Oregonians federal workers are being impacted yet, and if you're seeing that.
Well, on the unemployment insurance side, there's always going to be a certain number. I shouldn't like not a specific number, but that's normal part of our business. So we see layoffs that happen and different separations that occur throughout the year, and so that's a normal part of our business. This isn't something that's new. We haven't seen when we're looking at like historical numbers from past years and things like that. We're not seeing an increase. That could be just because they haven't happened here yet. It could be because it's just following seasonal trends. As Gail shared before, we have a small percentage of federal workers here, at various agencies, so that there's lots of different reasons why that could be occurring, but we're not seeing large numbers of layoffs here in Oregon, more than what we would normally see. But I do want to say, that even if it's just one worker, that impacts them a lot. So even though it's our regular course of business, we do want everyone to know that we're here to help. We're here not only with unemployment insurance, but we also have the WorkSource Oregon centers that are across the state that can help people find a new job, do some retraining, like resume building and all sorts of things like that. And so we have a federal worker page that we put together. So just to help federal workers who might be in a situation, they can go and instead of having to kind of go through all the different claimant handbook and videos and all the resources that we have, they can just go to that one page and get all the information that they need, because we want to make sure that just like all the Oregonians that we serve, that they have the resources that they have, and that they know that we're here to help.
Great. Thanks, Lizzie. Is that on the website then? Is that something you can go and see?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. And so that's answering it. My second question was going to be kind of like, how are you preparing for the prospect of these mass layoffs? I mean, if there are, I don't know, roughly 28,000 federal employees, non-postal, is that right? And if so, if there's a prospect of, thousands of them being laid off, is there anything more you need to do as a department to prepare for that?
Again, it's sort of this is what we do all the time. So, we're here to help. We are prepared for, volumes of claims coming in. If you talked about like a mass layoff of all federal workers, there's going to be different implications as far as services that are provided. Like we use the postal service to deliver our mail. So there's lots of things like that. So there's discussions, and we would handle that as it comes. And we would make sure that, we would work with the governor's office. We would work with our federal partners, and just to make sure that we know we can figure out what customers need to know about that, what changes might be happening, and we lean on, your media partners to also help deliver that message to communicate out widely so people know what they can expect from us.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay, we're gonna go back. So if you could limit yourself to just one question and one follow-up question, I'll go to Christina and then Brad. So Christina, go ahead.
Follow up to Tim's question. I know in the past, David has talked about needing more federal dollars to up staff and to just handle the level of claims that we currently have. I know it's still unknown how much this might impact Oregon, but with a share of 1.5% of the state's total employment, even small layoffs within the federal realm could really, impact the level of claims that you guys are seeing, especially if it's sudden. What are you doing to prepare for this? And how are you advocating for those federal dollars at this point? Are you expecting that you could even see them pull back on some of that money?
Thanks you for that question. Yeah, so we've shared with you, I know you've been with us through the pandemic and listening to, we are historically underfunded. And so we are working with the governor's office. We talk to federal partners and other things about, how to possibly get additional dollars. But really, when we're looking at this particular situation, again, it's sort of what I said, like we're doing everything we can to prepare for that. Right now what we're seeing in the trends is that it's sort of regular course of business, and we want to make sure that we can help everyone. If there was a large scale massive layoff that were to happen, that could impact customer service levels, and we would communicate out. Again, we talk to the governor's office, talk to other partners, see what we could do to lessen that, and we'll continually advocate for additional dollars so that we can staff up to just generally provide better customer service for all of our and businesses and all the other customers that we serve every day.
Am I allowed to follow up still?
Yep, one follow-up.
This one is for Gail. I'm curious if you have any data or any estimates or anything really that shows how this could impact across the board, because I know that there are some nonprofit workers, for example, that are already starting to see layoffs because of cutbacks in USAID. And I assume there's going to be other such things if Medicaid is impacted, for example. We don't know what the impacts are, but are you starting to look at any of that more widespread impact?
Thanks for the question, Christina. It's an important one. First, I wanted to go back to your last one and say that it looks like perhaps the OPM, Office of Personnel Management, Champions of Talent report that you were referring to earlier, looks like it may actually be excluding postal workers. So if you took that difference out of the numbers I was talking about, they would line up very closely. Moving on to the question about other areas of the economy, it is definitely front and center that we're looking at the reductions in federal workforce. Beyond that, there are other sectors of the economy. One that comes to mind readily is, for example, health research and things like that have historically been funded by federal government grants and other sources of funding. And if we do see that there are reductions in those going forward and they're not replaced with some other sort of resource, it is possible to see the effects of changes at the federal government level occurring in other sectors of Oregon's economy as well. And so we are doing our best to keep an eye on what's publicly announced as we get jobs reports in. The first that we could potentially see in terms of impacts in our monthly employment situation report would be perhaps, depending upon the timing, the February data, which comes out on March 26th. Again, it might even be later than that, depending upon the timing of people's separations from their jobs. And quite frankly, if there are folks who took, for example, a buyout option, and then, that keeps them on the payroll of their agency, later into the year, we wouldn't see those impacts until much later into 2025.
Okay, let's go to Brad. One question and one follow-up question, please.
Okay, I've got two. Lindsi, first question for you. Do you know and you may not know this, but do you know the percentage of how much federal funding pays the cost of the unemployment department's operation compared to the state? So say if the federal government were to cut their funding, would that have a huge impact? Can the state make up for some of that?
That might
No,
be
you don't.
something that I have to get back to you on, Brad,
Probably a
because
David question, right?
yeah, that's a
Well,
David question.
That's
It is.
fair.
I mean,
and so Lindsi was doing a valiant effort of trying to answer the other question that's really more of a David question. So what I'll do is
Okay.
I will follow up with you once he is back,
All right.
and I will follow up with Christina too on her question.
All right. Let me ask one quickie for Gail,
Yeah.
okay? Do you get any of your data from the federal government, and have you had any issues getting that data?
Thank you. Important question. Yes, we do our work on things like the local area unemployment statistics or the monthly jobs report. Those are done in cooperation with our federal partners at the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. And we have continued to see the flow of information, regularly released information coming from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. You know, over the past week or so, couple of weeks really, they've released their monthly jobs reports numbers for January. We've seen job openings and labor turnover survey releases for all of the states. We've seen reports of major work stoppages in 2024. So we do continue to see the flow of information coming out of the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics that we work with closely on our published employment series.
Great, thank you.
Okay, not seeing any further hands raised, we will draw this media availability to a close. Thank you to everyone who has participated today. Just a quick reminder, just a few quick reminders. There we go. We will send the link to the recording of this meeting to everyone who RSVP'd. We will also post it on our media page at oregon.gov/employ. And then that will be under news and agency information. And thank you for your partnership in keeping Oregonians, especially federal employees, informed about the services that we provide. Take care.
Thank you so
Thank
much, everyone.
Everyone.